All right, so John, it's a pleasure to have you in Oldenburg. That's for sure.
It's great to be here.
And it's a tribute to you and your dad.
Yes.
What's interesting about your dad is that one of the things that separates him. Obviously, listen, he's a kind of a legend in Hollywood. He's one of the guys that have been around. You know, amazing films, Capricorn 1. Star Chamber, so many films along the way. And what's interesting about your dad is that he was also one of the rare things, he was the DP often, I don't know if always, but often on his own movies.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and the reality is that he was basically always the DP, you know, from the get-go. That was something that was, you know, that was just in his mind. Part of the deal was that he was essentially going to shoot it. In the early going, because of union rules, he wasn't shooting it, and so he would have a DP, you know, on the movie. And you know, but it was very clear that, you know, he was going to do it, and it's like, you know, sometimes I remember like even feeling bad for like the DPs that were on there, because he, you know, it was maybe a different era where you really, like in my dad's era, you really had to kind of stake your claim and kind of fight for stuff, because he was a younger director when he came in. It was only like a handful of guys that young who were doing it when he started. He was in his 20s, you know, directing studio movies. And so you had, you know, to get the respect of the crew, all of that. It's like you kind of had to really come in and like be kind of alpha dog the situation. So there was always, you know, a bit of a, you know, I would say like a certain kind of relationship between him and the DPs, because he was so sure of how he wanted to do it, and that was part of his process. It ended up getting, you know, more and more difficult as time went on. I mean, there was movies that he did where he like the DPs would like sometimes not even be allowed on the stage. You know, like it would get awkward, and it got to a point.
But your father would not want them, basically.
He would not want them at all, and because he was just trying to say to the union, like, let me in the union, I want to shoot, and they would say to him, well, you got to start out being a loader and a camera assistant.
Right.
And he's like, I'm not going to be a camera assistant. I'm directing the movie. Like, there's no time for me to be a camera assistant.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. So,
you have to be the production assistant and the director.
Right. So the union was really resistant to letting him in, and it kind of came to a head on the Star Chamber that you're talking about, where the DP filed a grievance because whoever they hired to be the DP was just kind of like, it's like in baseball, it's like Billy Beane would have like Art Howe as a manager. Obviously this is a very cryptic point, but like the DP was essentially hired just because they had to hire someone, but there was no collaboration. My dad was going to be the DP, and if they were not going to let him in the union, then fine, we'll hire a guy and he can go whatever, you know, clean the camera or something.
Okay.
The guy wasn't happy about that. He filed
kind of understandable.
Understandable, right? Like, I understand.
I mean, these are professionals operating at top grade level.
That's right.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I totally understand both sides. And so the guy filed a grievance, and at which point my dad said, well, then take it to arbitration, you know? And so they took it to arbitration. So the union, 600, had to reluctantly let him in. And so now he's now in the union. So if you look at his career, in my mind, he's essentially always a DP of all of his movies, but he doesn't get credited, I think, until 2010. I think is his first credit.
Wow. So, but he was doing it the whole way.
He was always doing it.
So, was your dad one of those typical, like, kind of, at that time, kind of like a hard-ass director who was, like, really, you know, Ted Kotcheff was a guest here one time, and I became somewhat friends over time. You know, he did Wake and Fright and Rambo and stuff. So I remember asking him one time, he was talking to me about a difficulty he had with an actor, and I said, well, you know, how'd you handle that? You know, like, and he said, Doug, I used to be a pretty hard ass, that's
right.
what he told me, so, and I thought, oh yeah, that's right, those 70s and 80s guys, a lot of those guys, they didn't fool around, they had kind of a tough exterior.
I think, you think of like Frankenheimer.
Yeah, wow, of course.
Franken and all these guys.
Frankenheimer reminds me in your dad's ballpark, they kind of have like that,
absolutely,
like journeyman, but yet they still kind of have a...
But great craftsmen.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing craftsmen. I mean, Frankenheimer is a fantastic director, and I think that, I think that would be a compliment to put someone in that category, but I do put my dad in that category.
100%.
And in terms of their, pardon me, in terms of their ability to handle the medium and their craftsmanship.
Yeah.
I think my dad, in the end, I think he's definitely more of a hard ass than me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's generational, man.
Yeah, right.
I mean?
But the truth is, but he's on set, he's very he's never happier, and he's a very he's not a hard ass with his crew. He's very loving with his crew, and those are his. That I think that's what he loves more than anything, and I think that's even why he likes being a DP, because he wants to work directly with the key grip and the gaffer and the operator, whereas as a director, out of respect for my department heads, I eventually, yes, I have a relationship with anyone, but out of respect for my DP, I say, you are in charge of your grip and electrics crew and everyone. And so I'll talk to the key grip about baseball, but I'm not telling him how to do his job, because that's my, I let everyone delegate. I think my dad always loved to work directly with all those people.
Yeah, okay. But he likes all the technical details.
He likes it. So I think my dad's not a hard ass with those guys, and and all the people that he worked with, the key grips, the electrics, any crew member I've worked on. Many times have I been working, on a project where I'll have a crew member come to me and say, I worked for your dad when his was in Chicago 20, 30 years ago, and all these guys would lay down for him. They loved him, and he loved them. So he treated people great. But I think when it came to, studio producers, actors, maybe sometimes who, because he was working with big stars.
Of course,
he was a hard ass.
Yeah,
and he had to be, and so, and I've learned a ton from what his stories and watching how he handled these situations. Any situation that there is, that you could face, he's faced it, and I think we've all faced it somehow if we've done it long enough. And I've certainly benefited from all of his wisdom.
So it's funny because now it's getting me thinking about even 2010. Now I suddenly had a thought. The amazing thing about 2010, obviously, he's doing a sequel to one of the classic great films considered ever, a Stanley Kubrick film.
Sure.
So were you around? Were you seeing how your dad was approaching 2010? Was that? I mean, did he have a lot of trepidation about doing it? Did he,
Yes, and I think he had absolute trepidation. He had great reverence for the original, and he exposed me and my brother to 2001 early on, because I think that is still really the first modern science fiction movie by all standards, in terms of in terms of what visual effects and all of that can do. There was really nothing that compared to that,
and kind of presented it in a sophisticated way, where it's an intellectual kind of conceit, which science fiction on its highest levels is approaching, right? So it's it matched both things. Cinematically, it's a massively startling, awesome experience, while at the same time there's actual, intellectual concepts going on that you're grasping with.
Absolutely. It's one of just the great movies of all time, without question. So he always had that reverence for it. I think when the project came to him, I think his feeling was he would do it if he could just do a Peter Hyams movie,
right,
and not even attempt to do a Stanley Kubrick movie. that's what he did.
Wow, it's a smart, smart conceit.
It is, and so like I think he went into it that way. I think he literally got Kubrick's blessing, like they spoke about it and talked about it. Oddly enough, him and Stanley Kubrick are born on the same day, July 26th, along with Mick Jagger, for whatever that's worth. So he got Kubrick's blessing, and I think that was the idea. Like, I'll do this, but I'm absolutely going to I'm not going to do that same type of like heady sci-fi kind of art film that Kubrick made. I'm going to make an accessible Peter Hyams kind of science fiction thriller adventure.
Right. Yeah, more down to earth in a way.
Yeah,
you know, like
exactly.
That's what he does. He's a grounded filmmaker.
He is very much a grounded filmmaker, and so that was his approach, and that's what he did. And I think in the case of that, yeah, it was a massive undertaking, but once he took it on, then I don't think he really questioned that. Then he just was going to make his own movie.
Well, as a filmmaker yourself, you know, once you're then wrapped up in the process, you don't have time to... All that stuff goes away. Then you have to make decisions, get involved, direct actors. Then you're just going along with your vision. If you have a vision, obviously someone like your dad, clearly that's what he does, right? He's going along with his vision, making a movie. So I can imagine.
And he was actually communicating. What happened was his collaboration then became with Arthur C. Clarke. And what's really interesting...
did he have he had a close relationship with Arthur C. Clarke?
And this is like 1983 or something. And it's interesting. This is kind of a pre-internet situation, but they basically had devised what was sort of an email situation. Arthur Clarke was in Sri Lanka, and my dad was in LA, and they had kind of connected their computers via some type of modem situation.
So they were doing actual like email.
So they were basically emailing concepts and ideas back and forth.
Did they have records of all this?
I don't know. It's a great question, but my dad wrote the script by communicating with Arthur Clarke via computer modem. You know, in the early 80s, and that is how he wrote that.
That's a great part of that whole 2001, 2010 lore. You know, it's like the beginnings of...
It really is.
The internet and email was created through that. That's really cool.
It's pretty amazing. So, so then at that point, it was no longer, you know, the Kubrick was, you know, that was... His movie was 2001, and now he was essentially adapting Arthur Clarke's book of 2010 and doing it the way he would do that.
And this is an aside, but did your father enjoy working with Roy Scheider? Was that a...
Yeah. I think Roy was great. I think he was a really cool dude.
Because, of course, I mean, I loved Roy Scheider growing up as Sheriff Brody, but it's funny because, you know, he did Sorcerer, and Sorcerer is one of my favorite films of all time. It's an amazing... when I think of 70s directors, for me, William Friedkin kind of... They're all great in the pantheon, and then there's one guy who towers over them, and to me, it's William Friedkin.
Interesting.
And Sorcerer is one of those films that I think is, like, just mind-blowing.
I guess you have French Connection, Exorcist, and Sorcerer.
Yeah, well, I also think Cruising's an amazing,
and Cruising is amazing.
Crazy
you know,
film.
Coppola would be the other.
Yeah, well, of course.
Got, the Godfather's, Conversation, Apocalypse Now, but those are the two.
Yeah, exactly. But to me, it's like Friedkin has this kind of greater existential view on everything that just puts him there. But of course, I love Coppola, and. So I actually tried to get in touch with Roy Scheider when I was in film school to like ask him about what it was like working with Friedkin and Sorcerer. So I get him on the phone. He's out on Long Island.
And French Connection.
Exactly. And I get him on the phone, and he says, "Oh, hey, you know, how are you? It's nice to talk to a fan, blah blah blah." And I said, "Well, I want to talk about the movie Sorcerer with William Friedkin." He pauses and says, "I'm glad you're reminding me. It reminds me that I never want to talk about that prick as long as I live." And he said, "Have a nice day. Take care, Doug." And that ended it.
That's amazing. You brought up the wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And that ended it. I was
I think Friedkin certainly probably he had a reputation that he earned.
Yeah,
you know?
He was a guest here. I think it was last year. Or
Was
the
he?
year before.
I mean, he's hilarious now.
Yeah, now
he's great.
He's awesome. But and then okay, so then on to you. So how did you then get into film? Like, how did it start? I mean obviously with your dad.
It started with it started with my dad and growing up and being around the sets and then at a certain point, like being able to be on the set for entire productions. If it was over the summer, I'd go every day.
That's awesome, man.
And if he was shooting in LA and I was in high school, I would leave school and go hang out on the set.
And it's not like you're talking some indie director. You're talking your dad working with superstars at the time. And,
absolutely. And my brother and I my older brother and I, because we were of age during that time. My younger brother came a bit later. But we were obsessed with the craft aspects of it. And that to us, we didn't even think about the broader kind of implications of Hollywood or whatever that implies. My dad, had a very, he was a family man and we, lived a suburban life, but his jobs were super interesting and we loved being with him on the job. Mm-hmm. And he would let us observe, and I think the rule on the set is always like, don't talk, be quiet, and you can sit there. And so that forced us to observe. Mm-hmm. We weren't like the kids that running around and kind of being the center of attention. We learned set etiquette. Mm-hmm. That be quiet, especially when they're rolling, and even if they're not, really respecting everybody's process. And at a certain point, you're sitting there, and now it's like, oh, let's go watch what the special effects crew is doing. They're like rigging something. Mm-hmm. I'm going to watch them. Oh, I'm going to watch the makeup effects artists. And so to go back to how I got into this, we're young kids. I have an older brother. He's the older brother, so he has the camera and he's the director. Like my older brother was always the director. I'm going to be a movie director, so I can't be the same thing as him. Mm-hmm. So I never said I'm going to be a director. I would be the actor in the movies mm-hmm. and that we would make. But I was in studio arts. I was a drawer and a painter and all those things. So I really gravitated to makeup effects. So in the early, my early years as a kid, I was, I remember being on set and seeing Michael Westmore and hanging out with Michael Westmore in his trailer. And then when the production ended on Capricorn 1, Michael Westmore gave me his plaster molds of the chapped lips and blisters on these guys' faces, and I would take these molds and put liquid latex in them, and we'd make wounds and everything and bullet holes and things. So I got really into makeup effects. So for a while I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. But then as time went on and high school, moving to college, I sort of pursued what I was good at, which was studio arts, and painting and sculpture. And so I was kind of doing that. And then, eventually doing it professionally and making work and selling it and really putting my all into it. And as much as I loved film and always kind of imagined I'd love to find some way in there, because of my childhood and because my brother was always the director, I almost never admitted to myself that I wanted to be a director. Mm-hmm. I always thought I had to choose something else.
Yeah.
So
It goes back to the early thing when we were talking. We were saying, well, we're sports fans in my family. We always pick the other team.
That's right. You're right. You got to pick you can't pick the same. Like if my brother's a director and I said I'm the director, it's like there's only room for one director around here, buddy. So I never said those words that I wanted to be a movie director until I was a lot older. And really I don't think I really said it till I was 30. Because even when it's interesting, in Oldenburg we're showing my first movie, which was One Dog Day, but when I made that, I was a painter, and I had a painting studio, and we shot in my painting studio. But I had, you know, money from selling artwork that I basically financed the movie out of my own pocket.
Oh, so the scenes I'm thinking the scenes of the guy who takes forever to even put a stroke across it. That's in your studio.
Yeah, that's my canvas, and he's wearing my, you know, stuff, and that was just my studio in New York. So I was making the movie just as a project to do with my friends in New York, and it kind of started with, like, there really was no script. It would be like writing a scene, and then we go shoot stuff on a weekend or a night, because I had all these friends who were actors or artists, musicians, writers, you know, all these different things, and it just started kind of getting bigger and bigger, and you know, eventually then it's like, okay, we're gonna make a feature out of this. And before long, I had like sunk all my money into it and went into crazy debt, and it was just like, you know, obviously just a completely misguided, crazy thing. That then it's like I was now in the position that every filmmaker finds themselves in, which is, I have to finish this come hell or high water. And in the case of that, it's like, you know, I have to hustle and beg, borrow, and steal, and get as many you know, favors as I possibly can. Again, back then, doing something on film, so I'm actually like,
I assume you shot 16.
Shot 16, and so it's like everyone, you know, I'm dealing with negative cutters who are like literally like, you know, they're just kind of holding it over them. They kind of get my negative from me, and then it's like they pretty much shook me down. And I had no money, so I literally cut my own negative of that.
You shot it in New York.
Did
you process it in New York?
Process it at Gafanti Film Labs in New York.
Because I was thinking maybe Lab Link, which is where I used to go. Did you ever know Tony Landano?
No.
Okay.
I don't.
He's a legendary kind of production house for indie guys.
We were like Gafanti Film Labs, and like by the end, I remember like I owed them money. I used to get these messages from like Paul Gafanti. Paul, hey, you know, this is Paul Gafanti, like on my message machine. It sounded like some mobster calling me, and I'm like, oh man, I'm just like avoiding everyone, trying to pay everybody off. It was, you know, just my first kind of lesson in trying to deal with the business of it all and get it done. And like I say, I literally like cut the negative of that thing, and by the time it ended, I went, you know, I was showed it at a couple festivals and got like a couple of nice reviews, and that was pretty much it. And I went back to New York and was back in the, you know, in working in the art world, working as a fabricator, doing all that stuff. And at that point, I kind of decided now, like I'm probably 29 years old, 28, that I'm either all in on this or I'm out. You know, it's one or the other. And it was clearly, as much as I felt like my art career had potential and was paying some dividends, I realized that I loved film, you know, and I loved the collaboration of it. And as unsexy as it is to be an out-of-work filmmaker versus a starving artist, there's at least still some romance to that. But like out-of-work filmmaker, you're just one of millions of schmoes running around. Calling
yourself a director.
Right,
like.
You're calling yourself a director without a movie.
Exactly.
But I'm like, you know what? I think that's what I want to be. And so at that point, it was trading in this career that I'd really, you know, spent a lot of time and effort in building up, to just go all in on film. And it took a while of writing a lot of, you know, terrible scripts and trying, you know, a lot of opportunities that didn't happen, but eventually documentaries were my window in.
Okay. And I just want to ask you about One Dog Day. What's interesting is I watched it before I came here, and I was it's really good. It's a really good ensemble thing, black and white, lots of colorful characters, very New York hip, got a great jazzy score. And what's interesting to me is that, and it's got a very like, it comes from that place in New York of like Jarmusch and Kevin Smith, and it kind of fits in there, right? And it's whatever the luck of the draw, yours wasn't the one that was celebrated at the time.
That's right.
Because I think it fits right in that world. But one thing that separates it in my mind is there's a level of like action sequences, just the running through where the guys are doing actual stunts. The actors are doing stunts. And I was thinking to myself, were these guys stunt guys, or did you just convince these guys to do these kind of like, you know, running on the rails and stuff? Well, they could have got hurt, you know?
Yeah, they were not stunt guys. I mean, most of that was my great friend Andrew Sicking, who we grew up with.
Was that the guy just twirling the box?
Yeah.
That guy's amazing with the way he twirls that box.
Exactly. We're childhood friends. His dad is the actor James B. Sicking, who is actually in all 3 of my dad's movies that are going to be showing at this festival.
Cool.
James B. Sicking's in Capricorn 1. He's in Outland. And he's in Narrow Margin. So James Sicking was a great actor. His son Andrew, we were best buds since we were in 1st grade, and Andrew was always like a great stuntman. You know, he when we were kids, he could climb a tree the fastest. He could jump off roofs. He could do stunts.
And he has a physical swagger to him.
That's right.
He's not physically imposing in any way, but he's got a swagger to him.
No, he's a great athlete, and so again, that movie was done with my friends, and that's kind of the funny thing about that movie is just what you said. I'm coming from an art school world. My thought is, I want to make something like my influences at the time were Linklater's Slacker.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's right.
And Jarmusch.
Yeah.
You know, and trying to do, you know, Seeing Stranger Than Paradise and Down by Law, and like that's what I imagined that was the filmmaker I would be.
Right.
The funny thing is, you know, as some of us were discussing last night, it's like you have these ideas of who you want to be, and you sort of copy, especially at the beginning, your influences are not just worn on your sleeve, you're just kind of ripping them off.
Yeah, exactly.
Of doing, you know, so Jarmusch with the black and white kind of, you know, urban thing. But who you really are eventually reveals itself, and in making this kind of organic movie that is, we're sort of writing as we go, I'm doing this attempt at this kind of ensemble art film, if you will, of like different characters weaving in that Slacker kind of way.
Yeah.
But before long, it pretty much becomes like the movies that my brother and I had made when we were kids, which was always one person chasing another person until they got in a fight.
And that's when the film, actually watching the film, that's when it comes together.
That's the
because
best part.
early on, I'm thinking, as I'm watching, to be honest, I'm like, is this working 100%? Because it's really going to so many places, it's not coherent.
Right.
But when it really comes together is when that starts happening.
That's right.
You know?
And I think in the end, that proved to be, objectively speaking, the strongest part of the whole thing. And again, and putting that together, I don't know anything about story structure or anything. I should, but I don't.
Right.
You know,
okay.
I'm still coming at this not from like a screenwriting perspective.
Yeah.
But when I came out of it, you know, the thing that I think anyone got from watching that was like, okay, there was action, there was like the depiction of how these violent moments and these action moments, and like in the end, that's the stuff that I really loved to do as a filmmaker. And it would be a little while before I'd work my way back there, because I went into the documentary world, and I think also moved away from a bit of that kind of artifice and irony, if you will, to kind of the sincerity of images, and not being afraid to be, you know, to have emotion and heart in something.
Well, another film that's showing here, The Smashing Machine,
yes,
which is very much speaking to what you're talking about. That becomes a very earnest journey with a very earnest character.
Yeah.
You know, at least he comes across in the doc. You never know the reality of.
No,
you know,
I think that's an accurate depiction of who the guy is,
right.
And I think that was so in some ways that's really in my mind. It really is kind of my first film, because that's when I realized, well, that's actually what I should be doing is telling stories like this about people like this, and from that point on, even if I was doing an action movie, I tried to take that approach from The Smashing Machine into not being kind of removed from my subjects and with a wide angle lens and kind of artifice, but really trying to in fact take them and the situation seriously, even if the situation is, you know, on the surface kind of ridiculous, or you know, a kind of a sci-fi, hey, dead zombie soldiers from Universal Soldier, or literally like zombie outbreak in Black Summer. But my approach ever since then has been to really take these things incredibly seriously, and not kind of be at a remove from. And I think that, so I learned my lesson on those.
It's funny because that's probably also one of the things. I mean, the Universal Soldier films, to me, the first one out of the gate, and then the first sequel and the second one you did, there's, in so many ways, they actually, you know, they just kind of took the idea of like a Jean-Claude Van Damme, or like an action franchise from the 90s, into some whole new, exploded it in this whole new direction. And there's a lot of ways to think of that. There's many ways you do it, and this is the first time I'm thinking about it, is that there's actually a real humanity that you bring even into the first film, and the way you approach all of the characters in the film. Even the little simple one with the Dolph Lundgren character, there's a depth there that he doesn't even have in the 1992 version. Like, just in his little moment, there's a depth to his character, you know. So I think you bring that.
Well, I think I think, again, like, if you look at the first Universal Soldier movie, it's very comedic, but ultimately it's like it's very tongue in cheek. It was made in the post Terminator movie, where everyone was kind of trying to do their version of Terminator with any action star of the day, and in that Cameron tradition, there was always a lot of humor, and I think there was a lot of sincerity too, but Cameron always had a degree of humor, and I think the ones that came after almost leaned more on the artifice and the humor. And you know, Roland Emmerich's Universal Soldier is pretty much a comedy. You know, it's like a dark comedy, and it's funny, and he did a good job with that. But by the time it worked its way to me, I thought, that's not like a line I even want to straddle. Like, I don't want to be like, have it be kind of funny, but then be kind of serious. I thought, if whatever this opportunity is that's coming my way, this is my opportunity. I'm just a guy who's done documentaries, and I've done some TV. First
of all, that's another whole line of questioning, how you actually, I mean, that must have been intimidating, or when you first got this experience, like, you're the guy who did One Dog Day, you did a couple documentaries, and suddenly you're doing this, you know, action movie that's overloaded with action. I mean, from the very first scene of the car crashing into the back of the car, and you're dealing with action stars, like, you know, like a franchise that comes with a whole name attached to it. I mean, it must have been daunting on some level.
Well, the truth is, you know, my dad was the DP on that movie, and because there's no way they were gonna, like, they didn't probably feel comfortable with me as a director. They don't know me. I had done storyboard work for the producer, and that's kind of how
I don't know who would have quite felt comfortable with you as the director, to be honest.
Yeah, nobody would. Jean-Claude vouched for me because he was a big fan of the Smashing Machine.
Okay, cool.
And I presented it to him as, we're going to bring kind of a documentary, you know, realism to.
And I think that's also where he seemed to be wanting to do different things at that point in his career. So it worked out quite perfect.
Right. It was like right after JCVD, where he had done this.
And he liked this whole new somber kind of approach.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Because he was a guy who, there was some miles on his face.
Exactly.
And he was interesting that way. And so my dad was essentially the insurance policy. And I'm grateful that he did that, and it was great to have him alongside me there. Of course, like, on a certain level, it was daunting in terms of dealing with the studio and all those things. I can't say, like, the action stuff didn't intimidate me at all. Like, I felt really comfortable. I
realize because you've been around this stuff for so long.
I've been around it. I really had an idea of how I wanted to shoot that stuff and how it would go together. At this point, I was an editor myself. I'd been edited my docs, and I really had an idea of how I wanted to go about it. So that being said, you know, I learned everything in the world there is to learn on, I had to learn on the process of making that movie, which was like the power structure of a production and the political kind of story that's happening the whole way. And just in terms of getting the movie made, already, you know, there's a whole amazing, you know, elaborate story about how and why that thing came together. You know, the movie was sort of born out of a series of lawsuits that people were filing against each other, and this movie kind of came together as a way of everyone getting out of this jam. And I was just kind of like the guy in the middle of it that stood to potentially benefit from this if I could bring together all these opposing forces, all these people who were like literally in legal beefs with each other, between the producer, between Van Damme, between Dolph. You know, there was nothing harmonious between any of them. And as I was being, you know, I was sent a script and then put on a plane within like a day to Brussels. And as I'm going on this tour to meet with Jean-Claude and meet with Dolph and meet with everyone along the way, I'm realizing that none of these guys really want to work together.
Even Dolph and JCVD, they didn't really?
Not at all. And they don't want to, and they hate the script, and they have no desire to do this. And everyone has a beef with the other person. And what I quickly learned, which is really the most important lesson I've ever learned in this industry, is that we had what was a go movie. If I could get Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren to agree to be in this, I get a movie. And that was my job. You know, forget about how I'm going to direct it or what it's going to look like. My job was to, you know, a producer, Moshe Diamant, put me on a plane with the mission of, if you can convince these guys who don't want to do this to do it, you get to make a movie. And so that's what I had to do. Okay. And it was through, you know, and it was through a lot of just thinking in the moment and hustling, presenting my idea to them. But, you know, the funny story of it came when I was sent to LA, and I'm put in a meeting with Dolph, his manager, and several of like guys from Millennium Pictures. Again, learning the lesson that right there, that when you're put in a room with a person you're trying to convince of something, if there's 4 or 5 people in the room with you, you'll never convince them of anything.
I know that. Well, because it's also, you're distracted. There's other voices,
and it becomes a performance.
Yeah, exactly.
And so people aren't actually their sincere self. They're sort of putting on a persona. So Dolph was pretty combative. He was saying this script is going to be a piece of shit, and you are, you know, you seem like a nice guy, but you have no idea what you're in for. They're going to cut your legs out from under you. I've done this 100 times before. These people, you can't trust them. It's going to be another garbage movie, and you know, and I don't really want to do another one of those. And so I laid out this whole spiel of how, like, well, no, this is going to be different because I'm coming from documentaries, and and I have no desire to do that either. And this is what the movie, and so I've literally read the script a couple days before. The script is a mess, and I have to completely do a page 1 rewrite. And so I'm presenting this loose idea that I'm kind of making up on the spot too, of like what it's going to be. Oh, this is going to be like, you know, it's going to have the seriousness of Alien, and it's going to be about, you know, it's going to be like Unforgiven, these, you know, like reluctant soldiers coming out of, man. So I'm presenting all this, and he's like, well, you know, that all sounds pretty good. So when are you going to have a new version of the script so I can read? And I thought, well, I'll probably have it in, you know, maybe 3 weeks, which was a stretch anyway.
Yeah, of course.
More than that, but I'm thinking around 3 weeks. And he said, well, I'm leaving town in 2 days. And I said, well, I'm not going to have it in 2 days, you know, that's for sure, but I'll send it to you when I'm done. Yeah. And he's like, why don't you write my scenes first? And I thought, well, I mean, I have to sort of structure the whole thing out. I don't know how I could just write your scene. I don't have exactly figured out. And before I can finish my sentence, you know, someone else chimes in, yeah, why don't you write his scenes first? And pretty soon everyone in the room's like, write his scenes first. So I was like, well, let me think about this, and I'll get back to you guys. So I left the meeting, and I called his manager, and I said, all right, between you and me, I have no idea what this movie's about, and I have no idea what Dolph's character is going to be doing in the movie. But if this is what it's going to take, I'll write his scenes today, and I'll send them to you guys tomorrow, on the condition that he meets me one-on-one after I send him to him, with no one else in the room. And so his manager said, Craig Baumgarten said, okay, he agrees to that.
Okay.
So those scenes of Dolph, basically, of this kind of, this whole idea of the clone kind of being born and having these diagnostic,
and they're great scenes, by the way.
But it's kind of like, there's this kind of existential kind of angst that this newborn is having by what happens when a grown man is born but he has no experience, and it creates some glitch. So I just wrote those scenes out of, you know, completely in a vacuum, sent them to him. I met with Dolph. He liked the scenes. He's like, this is great. That sounds good. And after that point, I basically reverse engineered the whole script around those scenes that I'd written.
And are those scenes pretty much in the film?
Yeah, those are like, it's exactly what we did. Basically.
That's amazing, man.
So, you know, it just, I mean, I think the point is that what filmmakers can take from this is that sometimes you just got to do anything to get your movie made.
Yeah.
Even if it's the last thing in the world you think you're able to do. In this case, like, write scenes that happen in the middle of a movie first. Mm-hmm. I mean, on that movie, I had to shoot the climax the first week, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, you know, there's all these kinds of things that you learn that you never want to do. And you're like, no way I'm doing that. And you're like, well, it's this or no movie. And so you're always going to do that.
Right, exactly.
And so that, you know, it was so in many ways, I have like 3 first movies, you know, each one was like, because that was like a first movie for me, you know, and I think by the time I got through that one, I really felt like there's no situation.
You're a veteran at that
There's
point.
Nothing would intimidate me.
In fact, I was thinking as we were driving and you were describing this, I was thinking to myself, well, you're like a young veteran already of the game. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what it felt like, you know, and I think so. It's like you have these, you know, all of us, it's usually a filmmaker's first movie, whatever it is, where you have these kind of powerful, challenging experiences. And once you get through those, because in the end, it's like, it's not like life or death and we can handle these things. So
yeah, exactly.
The most important thing as a filmmaker is just don't panic.
Yeah.
No matter what's going on.
Makes sense.
And if you can kind of live in that place of not like, what if something goes wrong, but like something is going to go wrong and I'm totally ready for it and it's going to make the whole thing better. And if that's what your mentality can be, and you convince yourself of that, that's kind of when you start to, I feel like, think like a filmmaker.
All right, man. I think probably we could continue talking for hours anyway,
Sure.
which we probably will do. So we'll probably just go eat at this point.
Okay.
So, man, it was a pleasure talking here. Let's continue it with drinks now.
All righty.
All right. Cheers.
All right.